Record.
All right, recording in
Thank you so
progress.
much. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Donna. I am an energy and climate justice organizer with KFTC, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, working across Kentucky on climate policy and organizing initiatives. And I'll pass it to Moana.
Hi, my name is Moana McClellan. I work as a community engagement manager for the Rocky Mountain Institute. And let's see, I'm not sure if I will make sure Amy Owens, hopefully.
Everyone, I'm Amy. I was formerly a PhD student at West Virginia University. Right now I'm at SUNY ESF up in Syracuse, but this summer my advisor and I, Dr. Jamie Shin, are going to be doing research in West Virginia on energy systems and how people relate to them using photo voice technology, which is pretty exciting. So I'm excited to be here. I'll pass it to Leslie.
Hi, Leslie Rhodes, Pennsylvania Municipal League. I am the sustainability coordinator here. We actually work with Matt Mahoney from Sustainable Pittsburgh for the Sustainable PA program. We are having a conference, and so I actually heard from Patty DeMarco about Reimagine Appalachia and checking this out today, kind of as a viewer. So thanks for having me.
I can go next. My name is Rika Rosenstein. I'm a research associate. I started working with Reimagine Appalachia at the beginning of this year, and I am mapping for Reimagine all the federal grants and funding that are coming along with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the IRA, CHIPS Act, and so forth. And I am the note taker and recorder for the session for the first time, so bear with me there. All right, I'll pass it to Steve.
I'm Steve Herzenberg. I'm the executive director of Keystone Research Center and the co-director of Reimagine Appalachia, and one small spin-off project for us from Reimagine has been we're working with the city of Pittsburgh around how to leverage the federal funds. And so I think one of the exciting conversations, actually also in the context of Allegheny County, which had an important election a week ago, is there should be the dots connecting in a way that allow Pittsburgh and Allegheny County to really craft some exciting kind of community benefits approaches. So I don't know who else hasn't gone. Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
I can go. My name is Kaylin Obiozo-Adori. I'm with the West Virginia Community Development Hub. I am the Racial Equity and Community Coaching Associate for the Hub. In the last group, you heard one of the presenters from Coalfield talk about Act Now. I'm actually working under the Act Now grant funding with a program called Accelerate, where we're going to be helping 8 communities create economic resilience plans for their community.
I'll go next. Hi, my name is Tammy Fleming. I'm the Infrastructure Investment Equity Fellow at the Department of Labor. I am working with the Good Jobs Initiative, and I share time also with the Women's Bureau.
I can go next. My name is Ntando. I am a budget and policy analyst working in Pittsburgh. Currently, I'm working with Steve Herzenberg with City of Pittsburgh and mapping out climate funds from the federal government and how the city.
And I may be the last person to go, but hi all, Jessica Arians with the National Wildlife Federation. I'm our senior program manager for climate and energy policy based in DC, but work a lot with Reimagine and have been thinking a lot around Justice40 and EJ mapping tools for a while. I'm so excited to join this conversation. Thanks.
Matt, should I get started? I think I'm first, right?
Yeah, I think you are, unless anybody else hasn't introduced themselves or would like to. But I think, yes, I think, do you have screen sharing capabilities?
We will soon
Now
find
we'll
out.
find out, yeah.
Okay, let's see. Can everyone see that? Oh, wait, hold on a moment. It's probably helpful if I actually share. Can everyone
we can
see
see
that?
There we go.
Yeah. Can you make it slideshow? There you go. Perfect.
Well, hold on a minute. There we go. All right. Bear with me with my technical difficulties that I tend to have. So I just introduced myself. I'm Carla Walker for World Resources Institute. I am the U.S. Director of Environmental Justice and Equity. I'm speaking to you actually from DC, but I'm actually based in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm just in DC to work this week. So it's wonderful to see all the folks from the Ohio Valley join the summit and share a little bit more of their work. My role at WRI is to kind of work across our climate, energy, food, water, land teams to ensure that our research and our programmatic initiatives are incorporating environmental and climate justice and equity concerns, concepts, strategies for more effective, equitable outcomes. And for this session, I was asked, and some of this may be old hat for some of you, but I was asked to kind of present an overview, just a very general overview of what is the Justice40 Initiative, to provide you with that framework and hopefully kind of connect it more to what we're saying with CBAs and the summit so far. A lot of folks are talking about kind of like we're at the moment where a lot of funding is being pushed from the feds down to cities, states, municipalities, local groups. What I think you'll find interesting is like, how is that actually happening? Part of that is through the Justice40 Initiative. So I'm just going to try what I've called this is quick takes, right? Just to give you that kind of high level overview and a little bit of kind of grounding and background. So the Executive Order 14008, which is called Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad, is one of the first executive orders that was signed by Biden when he came into office. And this actually established this idea called the Justice40 Initiative, but there were a number of other elements that were included in that executive order to help center environmental justice within the administration's climate and economic agenda. Things like creating the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council and helping to, encouraging and requiring agencies to work in consultation with local and state governments when they're doing these environmental justice issues, engaging community experts in the delivery of the overall goal of some of the environmental justice work. So there are a lot of different kind of Easter eggs, if you will, in that executive order, but I'm going to focus on the Justice40 Initiative. This is actually something that was created or actually lifted up state level policy precedents that were already happening and taking place across California and New York, where advocates, environmental justice stalwarts had been successful in establishing some legal mandates for targeting investment in environmentally vulnerable low-income communities. Like in California, there was State Bill 535, which in 2012 authorized Cal EPA Air Resources Board to identify disadvantaged communities for the purpose of targeting a share of the investment from the greenhouse gas reduction funds, right, to disadvantaged communities. In New York, it was the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act in 2019. The issue here is that, like, obviously working in concert with EJ scholars, elders, advocates, and those working and living in those communities, this was an opportunity for the administration to bring environmental justice from the margins to the center of federal policy and investment. And if you were at the very first session, Kathleen Mulligan talked about, and this was echoed by other folks in during the summit, like this is actually a moment for CBAs, but Justice40 is like the moment for the EJ movement. So So what does that mean, right? So there's this policy. What does that actually mean? The idea of Justice 40 is it aims to deliver 40% of the overall benefits of certain climate investments to disadvantaged communities. And this is part of the administration's all of government approach. And this directive marks a turning point, really, for I think, for the environmental justice and equity movement, which, as you all know, if you're in this fight and you're working in these communities driven by, there's discriminatory infrastructure, environment, and economic policies that communities that have impacted communities, and where they have faced high levels of pollution, threat burden, health burdens, chronic disinvestment, and hopefully achieving this goal of kind of delivering at least 40%. Again, this is a bottom, not a ceiling, but of delivering this goal of that 40% would help set the U.S. on this path of redressing historic inequities and systemic injustices by mobilizing these significant new investments into these communities. I've bolded 3 things here we're going to try and drill down just a little bit on: overall benefits, select investments, and disadvantaged communities. I think those are kind of key things to just keep in mind. You'll see here on this slide, when we talk about investments for J40, there are 7 policy areas that have been identified by the administration, where within those policy areas, departments and agencies and commissions are looking at how to structure their programs and policies around the J40 piece. Next up is this idea of disadvantaged communities, right? So it's really trying to identify how the administration is defining this term, and they have defined it using what is called the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. You'll hear a little bit more about what that tool is, how it's used, what it's for, a little later on by one of my colleagues. There are other agency, effectively, it's a tool to help kind of identify which community is eligible for these J40 investments in general. Now, there are other agency-specific tools that are also kind of used to capture sector-specific nuances for vulnerable communities, right? So when you look at Department of Energy, right, they have energy burden specific kind of tools to look at. DOT has a tool that helps kind of really scratch out the transportation inequities. And there are other tools available to help you kind of identify disadvantaged communities, right? There's EJ Screen, which has been out there for a while. But the CJEST is the first time the federal government has an overarching tool to kind of help define and identify these what are disadvantaged communities. The third piece that I highlighted were benefits. Here, I think there's more work that the administration is doing, but an example of benefits that have been kind of identified in preliminary guidance by the administration a couple years ago are things like reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, creation of these community resilience plans, increasing technical assistance and community engagement. And when I say the administration has a little more work to do, kind of really identifying like what are all the benefits for any of the for the Justice 40 programs that exist. That list is not public to my knowledge yet, but also each agency should, by mandate of the J40 initiative in that executive order, each agency should be establishing a methodology for calculating those benefits that flow to each of those applicable covered programs. We'll talk a little bit about that and how they accrue in the disadvantaged communities. Tracking progress. So what I wanted to do here is just tell you a little bit of even though we may not have kind of like a listing of the benefits and the methodologies for how those benefits are calculated or how they are measured over time to kind of get what that 40% of a benefit for one of those investments might mean, the administration has begun publicly putting something out publicly that does track the progress of the agency activities around not only Justice40, but also overall the activities and changes that various agencies are making to help address environmental justice issues. So earlier this year during Earth Day, the administration announced and released its baseline environmental justice scorecard. And so this is the first government-wide assessment of federal agencies' efforts to advance environmental justice. It will evolve over time. The goal of creating this kind of robust and comprehensive overview of how the federal government is working to secure environmental justice initiatives. That phase one, and I've listed here on this slide, the link to the scorecard, but that phase one of the scorecard includes 3 areas. It includes information about the Justice40 Initiative for each of the agencies and commissions listed. It includes information about environment and civil rights protections, as well as kind of how those agencies are institutionalizing environmental justice. What I've done here is just give you a bit of an excerpt of the Department of Labor's report in this first scorecard. And what I mean by that is you'll see, how many Justice40 covered programs are in each of the different agencies or commissions. How many funding announcements, the amount of dollars that are being made through the J40 covered programs. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means in this next and final slide. And again, you will also see some of the program modifications that the agencies are making. Very, very helpful information indeed in terms of like just being very transparent on the part of the administration to really kind of explore or to really show and demonstrate what's happening and what's going on. You can also see that there's a lot of money being organized through the Justice40 Initiative. And then finally, just kind of a couple of things that I really want to make sure you keep in mind in terms of the Justice40 Initiative. It's not just a matter of let's make sure that we're giving, that we're directing dollars to these communities, right? This is a rework of some existing federal programs and also the creation of new federal programs with the intent to ensure that funding is being delivered to those disadvantaged communities. The dollars that we're looking at are coming from IRA. They're coming from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill and also America Rescue Plan. And these are direct investments to those communities. I talked about covered Justice40 programs. There are more than 450 programs from across the different, federal government. 19 agencies and 5 departments and commissions have the several covered programs. Typically, you can go to the agency website and there's usually a J40 page there, but now with the scorecard, you can definitely go to the scorecard and find out what are the Justice40 programs in some of those agencies and commissions. And then a covered program is, it includes any grant or procurement, spending, financing, staffing costs, or direct spending benefits to individuals that are actively working on these programs. I'm going to turn it over now. I know that was a fast and quick, but I'm going to turn it over now back to, does it go to Sujata, Matt? I'm not sure.
I believe you're right. Yes. And I just want to mention that we have to keep it tight. We want to leave enough time for some Q&A. So I'll keep my my presentation tight. Thom, Sujata, please, let's keep it tight.
Yep, all
And
those
thank you. And thank you, Carla. I think that was a fantastic setting the scene, understanding the general concepts and building an a general awareness, understanding of the components of Justice 40. I think that was great. Thank you so much.
Echoing that, now that Carla's introduced you to Justice 40, I'm just going to talk a bit about how we identify those Justice 40 communities, and it's using the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. So CGIST is one of the many ever-growing universe of environmental justice screening tools. It has 30 indicators spread across 8 categories. Those 30 indicators are listed on the right. The tool identifies disadvantaged communities at the census tract level. All of us have census tracts. They vary in size, but average about 4,000 people. And census tracts are identified as disadvantaged if they meet the 90th percentile threshold for at least one indicator and the 65th percentile for low income. What that means is it is the 90th percentile for highest energy burden. And as you see the criteria like footnoted at the bottom, 65th percentile for low income. Areas that are federally recognized tribal communities are also inherently recognized as disadvantage, and areas that are surrounded by disadvantaged census tracts and meet the 50th percentile for low income are identified as disadvantaged. The socioeconomic indicator for workforce development is a little bit different. The low income criteria is replaced with the requirement that at least 10% of the population over age 25 in the tract has a high school education, that less than 10%. An important thing about CGIS is that all disadvantaged communities are equal for Justice 40 purposes, meaning the tool offers a binary designation of disadvantaged or not. It treats tracts that meet the threshold for 11 of these indicators the same as those that meet the threshold for 1, which we'll discuss more in a bit. There were some new additions. That's why you see the asterisks by the updated tool. They took public comment and they will be revising this yearly. One thing to note on this list is that it does not include race, which was likely left out due to fear of legal challenges. So who does CGIS identify as disadvantaged? 1/3 of the US population. Over 90% of the population in US territories like American Samoa and Northern Mariana Islands, but over half of the residents in places like Oklahoma, Mississippi, West Virginia, Arkansas, and New Mexico live in disadvantaged communities. You see particular indicators are particularly relevant for certain states. For instance, if you look at the abandoned mine indicator, over half the people identified by this indicator live in states like Kentucky, West Virginia, Ohio, Alabama, Pennsylvania. An important thing is that some communities face more burdens than others. Again, we talked about that binary designation, but communities are either disadvantaged or they're not. But as you can see by this map, some communities are more disadvantaged than others. You saw there are 30 indicators total, and the most that any single census tract meets is 18. A majority of disadvantaged communities, about 57 million people, meet 3 indicators or fewer. But over 7 million people living in places that, when you look in Appalachia, across the Southeast, tribal lands in Arizona and New Mexico, as well as around the Gulf. And when you look at the racial breakdown of communities facing more than one burden, what you see is that the more burdens a place faces, the higher the share of residents of color. In communities that meet the threshold for 10 indicators, 35% of residents are Hispanic or Latino, 41% are Black, and 17% are white. By contrast, in communities that meet the 3 indicator threshold or fewer, 28% of residents are Hispanic or Latino, 15% are Black, and 50% are white. What this means for how we go about implementing this. CGIS is joining that kind of rapidly growing cohort. You've got like 30 plus environmental justice screening tool across state, local, and federal agencies. But if only one tool will be used to identify disadvantaged communities, the federal government has said that it's CGIS. State tools and even screening tools developed by federal agencies like DOT, DOE, HHS can be used as supplemental tools that provide you with additional information to help identify disadvantaged communities. But using CGIS only, grant recipients can identify and prioritize places with higher cumulative burden to ensure that federal funding flows to places that need it most. Keep in mind that these same places are also going to be capacity and resource constrained, meaning that additional help may be needed for these places to even apply for funding and go through the entire process. That's kind of the quick rundown. We can talk more about this if you need.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. I know I learned something there. Pass it on to you, Thom.
That sounds great, and I will share this. So far, so good. All right, Thom K with the BlueGreen Alliance, and I'll be taking us through some of the energy communities definitions, and hope you guys like maps. We got a lot of maps. So for Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, they included actually multiple definitions of energy communities to target a few investments. There's a grant program for advanced energy manufacturing in Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. For IRA, there's 48C manufacturing tax credit, and also clean energy investment tax credit and production tax credit. That's all very targeted at energy communities. One of the interesting things we've seen in the past month or so is the rural utility service is also using energy communities and this very definition from IRA to target some of their loans. So you get better interest rates and higher amounts of forgivable loans if you're in energy communities. There's still guidance coming out for different programs, so it's entirely possible some other programs will also show some favorability for energy communities. So running through real quickly what the definitions are, the first one is very focused on coal closures. So for the manufacturing piece of both bill and IRA, they're looking at coal closures for a coal mine that has closed since December 31st, 1999, or a coal-fired electricity generating unit that has closed since December 31st, 2009. Really want to emphasize unit there because a coal plant does not have to shut down if it has 4 units and one of them shuts down. That area becomes eligible. That's relevant in a lot of places. There's a spot in Colorado right now. The coal plant's going to be around for another 8 or 9 years, or it's supposed to be. But 1 unit shut down at the end of last year, so that census tract is now eligible. The other part is that these census tracts, anything that's adjoined to one of those census tracts is also eligible under these. So when I look here at also the second one, the broader definition, this is not for manufacturing, but for investment and production tax credits for clean energy. So if you are building a clean energy facility, or you just already have it built and you're producing clean energy, you can get a tax credit bonus for being in an energy community. The key here is that no matter where you are in the country, thanks to the IRA, you can get investment and production tax credits for clean energy. But if you locate in an energy community, you get a 10% bonus on top of that. And 10% is, a massive chunk of money and can really change the profitability of an entire project. So this is going to do a really good job, I believe, of driving a lot of these investments into energy communities. This definition is a bit broader. It is all the same pieces as the last one. So coal mine closure, coal unit closure, and adjacent census tract. But it also has 2 other large pieces. One is that a brownfield site counts. It is unlike the other ones, though. The brownfield site, it has to be the brownfield site itself. It's not the census tract that holds the brownfield site. It's just the brownfield site. The way I think you can go over the border of a brownfield site and still be part of it, but the idea is you're there. It's not the entire census tract. And then the other part is they moved away from census tracts here and decided to play with metropolitan statistical areas and non-metropolitan statistical areas. And those areas that have had 0.17% fossil fuel employment will become eligible if they also have an unemployment rate at or above the national average. Those two have to go together. Right now, that's what we've got. There's another portion here that you can see, the 25% greater local tax revenues related to extraction and processing. Treasury is still trying to figure out how they even get that information. They don't have that information. They're going to move forward, and the guidance is out. You can get these tax credits, but they're still trying to figure that out. So for right now, if you've got a good idea how to do that, let Treasury know. Otherwise, don't worry about it. They've also put out a map here. This is from the Department of Energy. That's based on the definitions they put together. There is one key piece here, though, they've not yet included, and that's the unemployment part that I mentioned. So again, here it's 0.17% fossil fuel employment and an unemployment rate at or above the national average. They've not yet put the unemployment piece into that. So at BlueGreen Alliance, we created our own. This is this is the map that matches theirs without removing for unemployment. And this is the map we've created once we do include unemployment piece. So switch between those two again, and I'll share all this, by the way. But that's what happens when you include the unemployment piece. Is a lot of the country is no longer eligible as an energy community. The other piece that I want to focus on is just the coal closures piece. This is what's relevant for the 48C manufacturing tax credits. This is what that will look like. So as you can see, it's a good bit smaller than the clean energy investment and production tax credits. This is for manufacturing, and it's still a good chunk of the country, and very, very coal focused. And the last piece that I wanted to make sure we share, especially since the Department of Energy is not planning to do a map like this, is showing the overlap between energy communities and Justice40. There's quite a bit of overlap, as you can see. One of the tricky parts here is, for some reason that I cannot imagine, they are not using the same census tracts. So something I can't remember off the top of my head. One of them's pre-2020, one's post-2020 census tracts. So they're not exactly the same, which is a bit frustrating, but for the most part, it's fine. You can see that coal communities are very frequently also Justice40 communities, which to those of us who work in that with some of these communities are not surprised to hear that. And then there's one other piece that I wanted to share here, and it's just some of the issues that come with it's extremely difficult to define energy communities. They're using census tracts, which makes some sense, but it does have some problems with it. And I'll put the conspiracy theory circles on here on the map, and you can see like there are just some spots that are a little odd. One of those up on the top left, that's Craig, Colorado, which is as much of a coal town as you can be, but it's left out just by kind of just an issue with the numbers there. That the census tract is really small and doesn't actually have the coal plant inside of it, so it gets left out. And you see a couple spots that are left out there at the bottom, but also some very small ones that are included near Denver that you wouldn't necessarily think of as energy communities because the coal plant closed down there a few years ago. But that's just something we have to deal with. I think it's still a largely good definition, but maybe they'll make some improvements over the next few years on their interpretation that take care of some of the gaps, which I think is more important than removing any other spots. But yeah, I can stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Thom. And I am going to wrap up at least this portion of the discussion, and I will be very brief. And apologies for... There we go. Hopefully you can see my screen, and I will be very quick. So my name is Matt Mahoney. I'm going to try to contextualize and think about how we're operationalizing, how we can operationalize Justice40, energy communities, and all of these different resources. Sustainable Pittsburgh, just for everybody's awareness, we're a nonprofit organization that focuses on empowering knowledge, perspective, and the ability needed to create a better tomorrow for our region in the Southwest PA region. We work with thousands of businesses, communities on recognition programs, and we track progress to advance social equity, environmental stewardship, and other components of sustainability. And we convene strategic networks. We, as I mentioned, our work is pretty much divvied up into providing sustainability recognition programs, networks that build on collective momentum and inertia to address timely issues in the region. And as these issues emerge, we try to tackle them through a variety of by convening networks and developing recognition programs and other projects around those issues. Some of our recognition programs focus on shops, restaurants, the workplace. In Sustainable Pennsylvania, we have a certification program that local municipalities can apply to and essentially allow their performance of sustainability to be assessed and receive recognition through a ranked criteria. And so when we're talking about these emergent issues, decarbonization in our region has become one of these very massive issues that we want to ensure, with massive federal dollars coming in and a lot of attention being paid, that there is genuine, authentic, meaningful engagement in these conversations, and that we're seeing change at the scale that we need to address the issues within our region, Southwest PA being one of those, including many of those disadvantaged communities and energy communities. And we want to see those benefits being attributed where they should be. And we need to measure and verify that those benefits are being allocated where they need to be. So decarbonization being an emergent topic, where we've collected input from stakeholders in the region to identify immediate priorities and next steps we can take. So these are some of the things that we're working on. We also convene a network of local governments under our Sustainable Community Development Network to pass along information and increase awareness about opportunities for advancing sustainability practices. We've been investing a lot of time in understanding the federal dollars, the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, with under our assessment, $38.5 billion available for national multi-sector equity-centered decarbonization programs. We're also looking at the Inflation Reduction Act, which has been mentioned, lots of tax credits, lots of opportunities for businesses, local governments, local workforce development programs, all in the Justice40 energy community conversation, keeping supply chains local, domesticating the supply chain, and ensuring good quality local jobs. So Justice40, that's where it gets us. Carla did a great job, gets us to where this whole of government approach, and we're thinking about how can Sustainable Pittsburgh be a contributor to the conversation, and how can we advance the conversation in a way that ensures that, that local governments are contributing, that when there are limited resources available, how can we squeeze the most out and provide capacity, enhance capacity, and build a stronger Justice40 ecosystem in the Southwest Pennsylvania region. And we're looking at it through the lens of this multi-sector, equity-centered decarbonization strategy. And so how are we building and contributing to building or enabling the components of that ecosystem between local governments, qualified contractors that provide services that align with those qualified topics that Carla had mentioned, those 7 groups, and how can we build stronger connections to ensure that that 40% basement is achieved. That's not the goal, that's the bottom. That's the bottom. So how can we get, and measure and verify that 40% and beyond is actually met? So we're working to build out those connections. So currently using the tools that were just referenced earlier, the CGEST and the energy community tools, mapping in the Southwest PA region first where those communities are, and building, helping to just first identify what are the components of that ecosystem, and then from there build connections, potentially with certifying contractors under certain projects that demonstrate a high level of desire and investment into one of those categories, or they have taken on a greater acceptance of what potential Justice 40 may hold within their own business operations, and we're working to develop sort of recognition programs to support those contractors in understanding the principles of not just community engagement for the sake of community engagement, but meaningful and authentic community engagement as it's being incorporated into community benefit agreements. So developing those agreements and principles in coordination with the networks that we work with and those partners that understand the reporting requirements, so we can help build capacity among those contractors and local governments and other stakeholders that may or may not understand, where they fit into the Justice 40 ecosystem. One of the primary components that we're focusing on as well is clean energy workforce. So there's a lot of existing tubes for funding that usually, the path of least resistance for federal funding is usually the way that funding will flow. And so we're trying to build new pipelines and develop an ecosystem around Justice 40 that is focused on equity for workforce development. So Justice 40 provides a good roadmap, a good concept that we're working to build stronger connectivity based on this platform among those employers, trainers, community organizations, all centered on a localized economic equity. And so that's how we're sort of looking at Justice 40 through the lens of a local community-based organization. I think I did that in more time than I probably should have, but I hope it is enough to engender dialogue. There are a lot of resources that are available on Justice 40 specifically. There was a report, the original founders of the Justice 40 Initiative developed a report that outlines a lot of great recommendations for local governments. It's called Making Justice 40 a Reality for Frontline Communities. Highly encourage everybody to look it up. Lots of great ideas that can be incorporated into community benefit agreements. And thank you. And I did have a few questions, and I'm not sure if there were other questions. I did see one put in the chat, and I'm going to stop sharing, but hopefully we can quickly use this last 10 minutes for questions. Please put questions in the chat. So the one question I had, I think for Carla, the environmental justice scorecard, you mentioned that there's going to be another iteration. There's likely to be other iterations of this Justice 40 or this scorecard. What do you foresee as what would be helpful as sort of what else should be included in that in the initial demonstration of a scorecard? And this is just to get the conversation flowing. Please, if you have questions,
I mean, what's not in this initial baseline is anything about the benefits connected to the dollars that are flowing, benefits connected to the investments and the that are flowing to those communities. So that would just be really nice to get a real understanding of what the benefits are for the various programs. And just in a practical sense, the platform right now is not searchable, right? And it's neither searchable nor is it you're able to kind of manipulate any of the data to kind of coordinate and collate any of the data to see across the various agencies if there are any similarities, right, in the benefits that are being delivered or what have you. But I mean, right off the bat, those are some of the things that just really two things that I would.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Quite right. It's actually something that we're at WRI. We're actually kind of going through the scorecard and looking at what are some of the things that could be included or should be included in this next iteration. Like it, along with the CJEST, are tools that the administration is saying, once a year, those things will be updated. And a lot of the, the development of both of those tools were informed by a lot of community engagement, a lot of community outreach engagement. WEJAC had a lot of interaction in the development of that as well. So it's not something that just came out the bat, came out of the blue, but I think they're just some, those are the two very top initial things that I could think of.
And I think that emphasizes sort of the state of where the Justice40 initiative and sort of the status of its of where it exists right now. There's a lot of new information that's been rolled out. There's a lot of new tools that have been rolled out. So as we're feeling overwhelmed and sort of trying to sort through it and figure it out, you're not alone. The federal government's alongside with us trying to figure it out. And so Jada, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I did want to move over to you and ask for the same question for the CJS tool and whatever you'd like to add on.
Yeah, I mean, I think Carla and I are just working together on a lot of this stuff. I think on the scorecard, everything Carla said about like operability, and also just like basic data transparency, like who the recipient of the funding is, right? So if we're going to track down to a census tract level, can we don't make us FOIA, like who actually received that money? So kind of there's a data transparency aspect on the inputs that they've talked about. There's also kind of, we haven't yet gotten to a point, and maybe that will come in phase 2, talking about actual outputs and outcomes and speaking to kind of this level of what the folks here can be looking at. The only way we show progress is if we have baseline data to compare it against, right? So a big part of this push needs to be on kind of upping that local capacity and establishing those baselines so that 5 years from now, 4 years from now, we can actually measure what impact Justice40 has had and if we've made a difference in these communities. On CJS as a tool, I mean, we have a whole blog post about it. I don't want to like go, but like, I think one of the main things is kind of that lack of cumulative burden measure that we showed, and how it really disadvantages communities of color that have been on the receiving end of a lot of the worst of our policies. And so without that kind of cumulative burden metric, you don't really capture that in the disadvantaged or not metric. Other agency tools like the DOE tool, the DOT tool in particular, I think you had up on your slide, the Environmental Justice Index from HHS, I think is a really robust cumulative burden metric. So for those of you who are going out there and looking to use these tools, CJS is the first cut. Does it qualify for Justice40 or not? Agencies have clearly showed a desire for people to supplement that with those agency-specific tools. And those tools do have cumulative burden metrics that can help you kind of dig a bit deeper into specific community needs. So would recommend going to them if you're applying for the Department of Transportation funding or like health funding or that sort of thing. I think Thom has his hand up and probably has more to say. I'm really curious also about some of the data sources for those overlays.
As a presenter, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be just asking questions, but I've got a question for Justice40 folks who know a lot more about it than I do. What happens on implementation of bill and IRA if we have a different president in 2 years, a different administration that doesn't want to do any of the Justice40 stuff? How much of the rulemaking and guidance provided has locked that into place, because it's not in the legislation here.
So IRA, I think energy communities is in the legislation, right?
Yes,
like that's kind of specified, which is like, it makes it very hard to change those criteria, but those kind of tax credit matters for energy communities are here to stay for the duration of IRA, which I think is really important to recognize. In terms of broader Justice40, Carla can probably speak more to this, but you're right? These are executive orders. These can be rescinded. I will say you also see a federal government doing everything it can to embed this in agencies through physical persons, right? Creating environmental justice officers in each agency, creating environmental justice plans for each agency. Clearly what this is setting people up for is, okay, even with a transfer of power, like trying, as Carla kind of talked about, embedding this in how agencies work. And that takes a lot longer to rip out, just as a way of working.
Yeah, I don't have any more to add to that. Sujata, you hit the nail on the head. It's the trying to make sure that it doesn't get unraveled to the extent that we need to start all over again with, a new administration. There are new offices being created in addition to the environmental justice strategies that each agency is required to create. There are equity strategies that each office is required to create. And so it will be very difficult, I think, to kind of dismantle this. Not that folks won't try, but
I'll follow on with that and agree, but I think a strong way that we can advocate for the continuance of Justice40 work is at the state level and ensuring that funding is directed towards at the state level for environmental justice planning, and a formalized structure within a state agency or a state agency itself, or connected to the governor's office, but in some way formally establishing environmental justice as a priority at the state level would ensure that longer term. And I know that we're then trickling down to the governor's administration, but I think there's stronger case can be made at the state. But I do notice that takes us to 2:29. I did see one other question. I think it is more or less directed at you, Thom. There seems to be plenty of info about green jobs for weatherization and electrification renewables. Has anyone here found or compiled info about water and green infrastructure jobs?
Yes, quite a bit. We did we had Perry UMass do a full estimate of what jobs would be created through the IRA. So we've got a good sense of that, and a lot of our labor partners do as well.
Well, if you have a link that maybe you can share in the chat, and Sujatha, you had mentioned also that you had a blog on CJS. If you have the access before we get taken out of this breakout, maybe we can at least get a few. Perfect. I'm going to pull that up myself and appreciate that. All right. Well, I guess that concludes, because I just got a notice that our breakout session will close in 52 seconds. So unless there's any burning questions. No? Well, thank you so much. This has been fun, and I hope, and please feel free to contact us. I don't know if our contact information is available anywhere else, but I can put my email address in the chat if you'd like to connect with me, and I encourage my fellow speakers to also, and I think this was a well co-facilitated session.
Thanks so much, Matt. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.
I think we'll